The glass doors of Sterling Equity Partners' Manhattan headquarters gleamed under the late September sun, reflecting the frenetic energy of the city. Inside, the 42nd floor buzzed with the low hum of ambition. Analysts crunching numbers, associates pitching deals, and the occasional clink of coffee mugs. But in the corner office, behind frosted glass etched with her name, Margaret Ellison sat motionless, staring at a single sheet of paper on her mahogany desk. The letterhead bore the Sterling logo, but the words beneath it were a gut punch. Termination of employment, effective immediately. Margaret, 64, had seen her share of corporate bloodshed over 3 decades, but this was personal. Her fingers, still steady despite the years, traced the edge of the paper as her mind raced. 8 weeks. 8 weeks until her meticulously planned retirement, complete with a farewell gala and a corner office handover to her protégé. Instead, she was being cast out like a discarded asset, her legacy reduced to a memo signed by Ethan Caldwell, the 38-year-old CEO who'd barely warmed his chair. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to the present. A text from Robert Hawthorne, one of Sterling's biggest investors. "Margaret, what the hell is going on? Call me." She exhaled sharply, her lips tightening into a thin line. Robert wasn't the only one asking questions. Her inbox was a war zone. Messages from colleagues, clients, and even a few board members, all blindsided by the news. Ethan hadn't just fired her. He'd orchestrated a public execution. The doors swung open without a knock, and Ethan Caldwell strode in, his tailored suit sharp enough to cut glass. His dark hair was slicked back, his jaw set with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. Behind him, 2 security guards loomed, their radios crackling softly. "Margaret," Ethan said, his voice smooth but laced with condescension, "I trust you've read the letter." She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. Her silver hair, swept into an elegant chignon, caught the light, and her hazel eyes locked onto his with a ferocity that made one of the guards shift uncomfortably. "You've got some nerve, Ethan. 32 years, and you think you can waltz in here with a piece of paper and erase me?" Ethan smirked, leaning against the doorframe. "This isn't personal, Margaret. It's business. The board wants fresh blood, and I'm delivering. You've had a good run. Hell, a great one. But Sterling's moving in a new direction, and we need agility, not nostalgia." "Nostalgia?" Margaret's voice was low, dangerous. "I built this company from a 2-room office in Queens while you were still in diapers. I brought in Hawthorne, Langston, Strathmore, investors who don't just write checks but trust this firm because of me. You think you can restructure that away?" Ethan's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. He straightened, adjusting his cufflinks. "The board's behind me, Margaret. They see the numbers. Our Q3 projections are soft, and we're bleeding market share to firms half our size. You're too busy playing golf with your cronies to notice." Her laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Cronies? Those cronies represent 60% of our capital. You think they'll stick around when they hear you've humiliated me? Robert Hawthorne's already texting me, Ethan. Patricia Langston's probably drafting a letter to the board as we speak. And Victoria Strathmore? She'll eat you alive." Ethan's eyes narrowed, but he didn't flinch. "Let them squawk. I've got the data, the vision, and the votes. You're out, Margaret. Pack your things. Security will escort you." The guard stepped forward, and Margaret's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a fury she hadn't felt since her early days scrapping for deals in a male-dominated industry. She stood, her 5'6" frame radiating authority, and pointed a manicured finger at Ethan. "You're making a mistake you'll regret, boy. This isn't over." Ethan tilted his head, a predator sizing up prey. "It's over when I say it's over. Goodbye, Margaret." As the guards flanked her, Margaret grabbed her purse and a single-framed photo from her desk, her and her late husband Michael, at Sterling's first major gala. She walked out with her head high, the click of her heels echoing through the stunned silence of the open plan office. Associates gaped, phones forgotten in their hands. The elevator doors closed behind her, and as the numbers ticked down, Margaret's mind churned. Ethan thought he'd won, but he'd just lit a match in a room full of dynamite. The Sterling headquarters hadn't always been a gleaming tower. In 1993, it was a cramped suite in Queens with peeling wallpaper and a coffee machine that sputtered like a dying engine. Margaret, then 32, had been the firm's first employee, hired by founder Henry Sterling himself. She wasn't just a deal-maker, she was a force of nature, closing contracts with a handshake and a smile that masked her relentless drive. Over the years, she'd turned Sterling into a powerhouse, her name synonymous with trust and results. Clients didn't just invest, they believed in her. Her secret weapon? Relationships. Not the transactional kind, but the kind forged over late-night scotch and early morning golf. Robert Hawthorne, a real estate magnate with a penchant for risky bets, had signed on after Margaret sank a 20-foot putt on the 18th hole at Pebble Beach. Patricia Langston, a tech heiress, joined after Margaret spent hours listening to her vent about her divorce over martinis. And Victoria Strathmore, a British aristocrat with a hedge fund empire, had been won over during a rain-soaked round at St. Andrews, where Margaret's dry wit kept her laughing through the storm. These weren't just investors, they were allies, and Ethan had just declared war on them all. By the time Margaret reached the lobby, her phone was buzzing again. This time, it was a voicemail from Victoria Strathmore, her clipped Oxford accent dripping with outrage. "Margaret, darling, I just heard. That little upstart thinks he can toss you out like yesterday's news? We need to talk. Call me." Margaret slipped the phone into her purse, her lips curving into a faint smile. Ethan had underestimated her, but he wasn't the first. She'd faced down chauvinists, skeptics, and market crashes, and she'd never lost a fight that mattered. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, the city's pulse matched her own. She hailed a cab, her mind already mapping out her next move. Ethan Caldwell's corner office was a study in calculated minimalism. Glass desk, black leather chair, and a single abstract painting that cost more than most people's cars. He leaned back, scrolling through his tablet, when his assistant, Claire, knocked tentatively. "Sir, the board's on the line. They're not happy." Ethan waved her off. "They'll get over it. Margaret's a relic, Claire. She's been coasting on her reputation for years. Did you see her last quarterly report? Half the projections were based on deals she closed a decade ago." Claire hesitated, her fingers twisting around her notepad. "But the investors, sir. I've had 3 calls from Hawthorne's office already, and Langston's team sent an email demanding a meeting." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They're bluffing. Investors don't care about feelings. They care about returns. I've got a plan to cut costs, streamline operations, and double our digital portfolio by Q2. They'll thank me when their dividends roll in." Claire nodded, but her eyes betrayed her doubt. As she left, Ethan's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "You've made a dangerous enemy, Caldwell. Watch your back." He frowned, dismissing it as a prank, but a flicker of unease crept in. Margaret was gone, but her shadow loomed large. Meanwhile, in a private room at the Greenwich Country Club, Margaret sat across from Robert Hawthorne, his weathered face creased with anger. The table was set for lunch, but neither touched the food. "Ethan's a fool," Robert growled, swirling his bourbon. "You think I'm going to let some punk in a $5,000 0-cent suit tank my investments? I've got $500 million with Sterling, Margaret. $500 million. Margaret sipped her iced tea, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Robert's fury. "He's betting on the board's support, Robert, but he didn't consult them. That's his first mistake. His second was thinking I'd go quietly." Robert leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "What's the play, then? You've got something up your sleeve, I can tell. She smiled, her eyes glinting with the same fire that had built Sterling from nothing. Oh, I do. Ethan thinks he's playing chess, but he's barely mastered checkers. I've got calls out to Patricia and Victoria. We're meeting tomorrow. If we move fast, we can turn this restructure into his resignation letter. Robert chuckled, raising his glass. That's the Margaret I know, to pay back. She clinked her glass against his, her mind already racing ahead. Ethan had wanted a war, and she was ready to give him one. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about legacy. Sterling wasn't just a company. It was her life's work, and she'd be damned if she let a cocky upstart tear it down. The rest of the chapter unfolds with Margaret rallying her allies, uncovering Ethan's risky financial gambles, and planting seeds of doubt among the board. Subplots emerge. A young analyst loyal to Margaret leaks internal memos. Ethan's past at a failed startup resurfaces, hinting at hidden motives, and a mysterious figure watches from the shadows, their identity a tantalizing question mark. The narrative weaves tension, betrayal, and intrigue, each dialogue crackling with stakes, keeping readers hooked for the next move in this corporate chess game. The chandelier in Margaret Ellison's Upper East Side penthouse cast a warm glow over the dining room, but the air was thick with tension. The table, set with bone china and silver, was a battlefield. James Ellison, Margaret's husband of 35 years, sat at one end, his knuckles white around a glass of Cabernet. His usually genial face was etched with fury, his blue eyes flashing as he recounted the day's indignity. Across from him, Sarah Nguyen, Margaret's fiercely loyal assistant of a decade, stabbed at her salad, her jaw tight. Margaret herself sat at the head, her silver hair catching the light, her expression unreadable as she listened to her husband's tirade. "That smug bastard," James growled, his voice rough with the edge of a man who'd spent his career as a litigator. "Escorting you out like a criminal, Margaret? After 32 years, I ought to march down to Sterling and put my fist through Ethan Caldwell's face." Sarah snorted, pushing her plate aside. "Get in line, James. I was on the phone with legal all afternoon, trying to figure out if we can sue for wrongful termination. The nerve of that guy, firing you without board approval. He's begging for a lawsuit." Margaret raised a hand, her voice calm but firm. "Enough, both of you. Lawsuits and fists won't fix this. Ethan's not just reckless, he's desperate. That restructuring excuse, it's a smokescreen. He's hiding something, and I'm going to find out what." James leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "You think he's cooking the books?" "I don't know yet," Margaret admitted, swirling her wine. "But I've seen his type before. Young, ambitious, overconfident. They overplay their hand, and Ethan's already shown his cards. Firing me was a power move, but it's backfired. The investors are rattled, and the board's scrambling." Sarah's eyes gleamed with a mix of admiration and mischief. "Speaking of investors, I got a call from Victoria Strathmore's office today. She wants you at her table tonight, Margaret, 8 o'clock, the Carlyle. She said, and I quote, 'Tell Margaret to bring her war face.'" Margaret's lips curved into a faint smile. Victoria always did have a flair for drama. "All right, Sarah, get me the files on Ethan's Q3 projections. I want to know exactly what he's pitching to the board. James, hold off on your vendetta. We're playing a longer game." James grumbled but nodded, his love for his wife outweighing his thirst for retribution. As Margaret rose to prepare for the evening, her mind churned. Ethan had underestimated her, but so had others before him. She'd built Sterling from a dream into an empire, and she wasn't about to let it crumble. Not now, not ever. The Carlyle's private dining room was a cocoon of old money elegance. Mahogany paneling, crystal decanters, and a view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. Victoria Strathmore, 52, sat at the head of the table, her auburn hair swept into a flawless updo, her emerald eyes sharp as she poured Margaret a glass of Chateau Margaux. The British heiress turned hedge fund titan radiated authority, her tailored Chanel suit a subtle nod to her wealth. Across from her, Robert Hawthorne nursed a bourbon, his weathered face set in a scowl, while Patricia Langston, a tech heiress with a penchant for bold lipstick, tapped her manicured nails impatiently. "Margaret, darling," Victoria began, her Oxford accent crisp. "I've spent the day fielding calls from investors who are, shall we say, perturbed by Ethan's little stunt. The man's strategy is positively Napoleonic, bold, aggressive, and doomed to fail." Margaret took a sip of wine, her gaze steady. "What's the word, Victoria? Are they spooked enough to act?" Robert cut in, his voice gravelly. "Spooked? They're furious. I've got Coastal Bay's board breathing down my neck, demanding answers. Ethan's pitching some harebrained digital pivot, crypto, AI, God knows what else. He's betting the farm on it, and the numbers don't add up. I'm pulling $80 million 0 cents, Margaret. Done deal." Patricia nodded, her expression grim. Horizon Corp's on the fence, but we're leaning toward withdrawal. That's $60 million 0 cents. Ethan's projections are fantasy, high risk, no substance. If he crashes, we're not going down with him. Victoria leaned back, her smile predatory. Global Zenith's out too, $40 million 0 cents. Wired this morning. The total bleed could hit $180 million 0 cents by week's end. Ethan's not just losing capital, he's losing trust. And trust, as you know, is Sterling's lifeblood. Margaret absorbed the numbers, her mind racing. A $180 million 0 cents exodus wasn't just a setback, it was a death knell for Ethan's tenure. But there was something else in Victoria's tone, a hint of calculation that set Margaret's instincts on edge. "You're not just here to vent," she said, locking eyes with Victoria. "What's the play?" Victoria's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The board's in chaos, darling. Edward Thornton and Catherine Ramsay are leading the charge, and they're ready to admit they misjudged Ethan. They're considering a drastic step." Robert snorted. "Drastic? They're tossing him on leave, effective tomorrow. Word is they want you back, Margaret. Interim CEO, full control. They're begging you to clean up his mess." Margaret's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. Interim CEO. It was a lifeline, a chance to reclaim her legacy. But it was also a trap. The board hadn't backed her when Ethan swung the axe. Why trust them now? She leaned forward, her voice low. "And what do you three want? You're not here for my health." Patricia spoke first, her tone sharp. "We want you in charge, Margaret, but not as a placeholder. Demand a permanent role, CEO, chair, whatever you want. The board's weak, and Ethan's exposed their incompetence. You've got leverage. Use it." Victoria nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "We're with you, but only if you take control. No half measures. Ethan's not the only problem. The board's judgment is suspect. We need a leader we trust, and that's you." Robert raised his glass, his eyes glinting with resolve. "To Margaret Ellison, the queen who never kneels." The toast hung in the air, but Margaret's mind was elsewhere. The investors were offering her a crown, but it came with strings she'd have to navigate carefully. As the dinner wound down, she excused herself, stepping onto the Carlyle's terrace for air. The city sprawled below, a chessboard of power and betrayal. She felt a presence behind her and turned to find Victoria, her expression unreadable. "Be careful, Margaret," Victoria said softly. "Ethan's not done. He's got allies, quiet ones. And there's something off about his numbers. I've got my people digging, but watch your back." Margaret nodded, her jaw tightening. "Always do." The next morning, Sterling's boardroom was a pressure cooker. Edward Thornton, the board's chair, sat at the head, his patrician features strained. Catherine Ramsay, his deputy, fidgeted with her pen, her sharp eyes darting to Margaret as she entered. The other board members, 6 in total, shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mix of guilt and desperation. Ethan was conspicuously absent. His leave of absence announced via a terse email at dawn. Edward cleared his throat, his voice heavy. "Margaret, we owe you an apology. Ethan's actions were unauthorized. His termination of your employment was a grave error, and we're taking steps to rectify it. We'd like you to assume the role of interim CEO, effective immediately, to stabilize the firm and restore investor confidence." Margaret stood at the far end of the table, her posture regal, her hazel eyes scanning each face. She'd dressed for war, tailored black blazer, crisp white blouse, and a single strand of pearls that had been her mother's. "An apology," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "That's a start, but let's be clear. Ethan didn't act alone. You let him wield power without oversight. You let him humiliate me, and you let him jeopardize Sterling's future. Why should I trust you now?" Catherine winced, but Edward held her gaze. "We were wrong, Margaret. We see that. The investors are pulling funds. $180 million, 0 cents at risk. We need you to stop the bleeding. Name your terms." The room held its breath. Margaret let the silence stretch, her mind weighing the investor's advice against her own instincts. She could demand the CEO role permanently, as Patricia had urged, but that would lock her into a fight with a board she didn't fully trust. Or she could take the interim role, rebuild her leverage, and uncover Ethan's secrets from the inside. Either way, she was stepping into a minefield. "I'll take the intern role," she said finally, her voice steady. "But I want full operational control, no interference. I report directly to you, Edward, not the full board. And I want access to Ethan's files. Every email, every memo, every projection. If I'm cleaning up his mess, I need to know what I'm dealing with." Edward nodded, relief flooding his face. "Done. Anything else?" Margaret's smile was faint but sharp. "Not yet. But I'll let you know." As the board murmured their approval, Margaret's thoughts turned to Ethan. He was out, but not gone. Victoria's warning echoed in her mind. He's got allies. She'd need to move fast, and she'd need help. Sarah, with her knack for digging up dirt, would be her eyes and ears, and there was someone else, a young analyst named Daniel Chen, who had slipped her a cryptic note during her exit. "Ethan's hiding something in the offshore accounts. Check the Cayman filings." Daniel was a risk, but he was also a lead. Back at Sterling's headquarters, Margaret settled into the CEO's office, not Ethan's minimalist shrine, but her old corner suite, restored at her insistence. Sarah was already there, a stack of files on the desk and a laptop open to Ethan's Q3 projections. "These numbers are a mess," Sarah said, her voice low. "He's banking on a crypto fund that doesn't exist yet, and there's a $50 million 0 cents discrepancy in the liquidity reports. Either he's incompetent, or he's covering something up." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Keep digging, Sarah. Cross-reference the Cayman filings Daniel mentioned. And get me a meeting with Daniel. Off-site. No paper trail." Sarah nodded, but her expression was troubled. "Margaret, there's something else. I overheard Claire, Ethan's assistant, on the phone this morning. She was talking to someone. Sounded like a lawyer. She mentioned the Zurich deal and said, 'If Margaret finds out, it's over.'" Margaret's pulse quickened. The Zurich deal. It wasn't in any of Ethan's reports, and Sterling hadn't operated in Switzerland in years. She leaned back, her mind racing. Ethan wasn't just reckless, he was playing a deeper game, one that could bring Sterling to its knees. But who was pulling the strings? A rival firm? A hidden partner? Or someone closer to home? That night, Margaret met Daniel Chen at a nondescript diner in Brooklyn, far from Sterling's prying eyes. The analyst was 27, wiry, with a nervous energy that belied his sharp mind. He slid a USB drive across the table, his voice barely above a whisper. Eatland's been funneling money through a shell company in the Caymans. Small amounts, but it adds up. $10 million, 0 cents over 6 months. The Zurich deal's the key. It's not in the books, but I found a draft contract in his deleted files. It's tied to a firm called Obsidian Capital. Margaret's blood ran cold. Obsidian Capital wasn't just any firm. It was a shadowy outfit linked to market manipulations and hostile takeovers. If Ethan was entangled with them, Sterling wasn't just at risk of losing investors, it was at risk of being gutted. She pocketed the USB drive, her voice steady. "Who else knows about this, Daniel?" "No one," he said, his eyes darting to the door. "But Ethan's paranoid. He's got people watching the office. Be careful, Margaret. He's not as alone as you think." The chapter spirals into a web of intrigue, with Margaret navigating the board's fragile trust, Ethan's hidden schemes, and the investors' demands for power. Subplots deepen. Sarah uncovers a cryptic email from Claire to an unknown recipient, hinting at a betrayal within Sterling. James, unable to stay on the sidelines, digs into Ethan's past and finds a link to a disgraced financier. And Victoria's people unearth a connection between Obsidian Capital and a board member, raising questions about who Margaret can trust. The narrative crackles with suspense, each revelation peeling back layers of deceit while Margaret's resolve hardens. She's not just fighting for her legacy, she's fighting for Sterling's soul, and the stakes are higher than anyone knows. The Sterling Equity Partners boardroom was a crucible of tension, its polished mahogany table reflecting the strained faces of the board members. Edward Thornton, the chair, sat at the head, his silver hair catching the morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Catherine Ramsay, his deputy, scribbled notes, her lips pursed as if bracing for impact. The other board members, 6 men and women, who'd weathered market crashes and corporate coups, shifted in their seats, their eyes fixed on Margaret Ellison. She stood at the opposite end, her tailored navy suit a quiet declaration of authority, her hazel eyes sharp and unyielding. The air crackled with anticipation. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning. Edward cleared his throat, his voice measured but tinged with urgency. "Margaret, you've had 48 hours to consider our offer. Interim CEO, full operational control, access to Ethan's files. We need your answer. The investors are circling and we're staring down a $180 million 0 cents shortfall. What's it going to be?" Margaret let the silence stretch, her gaze sweeping the room. She'd spent the past 2 days dissecting Ethan's schemes, poring over Daniel Chen's USB drive, and strategizing with Robert Hawthorne, Victoria Strathmore, and Patricia Langston. The investors had urged her to demand the CEO role permanently, to seize the throne and reshape Sterling in her image. But Margaret had other plans. Plans that would secure her legacy without chaining her to a board she didn't trust. She straightened, her voice steady and commanding. "I'm not taking the CEO role," she said, pausing as murmurs rippled through the room. Edward's brow furrowed, and Catherine's pen froze mid-stroke. "Interim or otherwise? You've offered me a crown, but it comes with a leash. I've built Sterling from nothing, and I'm not here to clean up your mess only to be second-guessed by a board that let Ethan run rampant." Edward leaned forward, his tone conciliatory. "Margaret, we're offering you carte blanche. Name your terms." She smiled faintly, a predator sizing up her prey. "I'm proposing a new role. Chief Client Relations Officer, permanent, with a board voting seat and full operational authority over client accounts. I'll stay 1 year to stabilize funding and restore investor confidence. After that, I walk away, on my terms, with my legacy intact." The board erupted in whispers. Catherine's eyes widened, and Edward rubbed his chin, processing the audacity of her move. A board seat gave her power without the CEO's spotlight. Client authority let her wield Sterling's lifeblood, its relationships, while sidestepping the bureaucratic quagmire Ethan had left behind. It was a masterstroke, and they knew it. "Will not CEO?" Catherine asked, her voice cautious. "You'd have more control." Margaret's gaze was steel. "Because I don't need a title to lead. Clients trust me, not your letterhead. Give me the role, the vote, and the freedom to work, and I'll bring back every dollar Ethan's scared off, and more. But cross me, and you'll lose more than money." Edward exchanged a glance with Catherine, then nodded. "We'll vote on it. But the investors, Hawthorne, Strathmore, Langston, they're expecting a bigger move. Can you deliver them?" Margaret's smile was razor sharp. "They're already on board. I met with them last night. You'll have your funding by week's end." The board's approval was swift, unanimous, and tinged with relief. As Margaret left the room, Sarah McGuinn waited in the hall, her eyes gleaming with pride. "You played them like a fiddle," Sarah whispered, handing Margaret a tablet with the latest investor commitments. "Robert's wiring $80 million 0 cents back, and Victoria's matching it. Patricia's still cagey, but she's leaning our way." Margaret nodded, her mind already shifting to the next move. "Get me a meeting with Daniel Chen. I want everything he's got on Obsidian Capital. And keep an eye on Claire, Ethan's assistant. She's still talking to someone, and I want to know who." Sarah's expression darkened. "You think Ethan's still pulling strings?" "I know he is," Margaret said, her voice low. "He's down, but he's not out. Not yet." The announcement hit Sterling like a thunderclap. By noon, Margaret's new role was official, and the news rippled through the 42nd floor. Associates whispered in break rooms, analysts traded theories, and the firm's intranet buzzed with speculation. Margaret Ellison wasn't just back, she was rewriting the rules. But the real shock came at 3 p.m., when Margaret strode into the open plan office, her presence silencing the chatter. She stood before a wall of screens, flanked by Sarah and a nervous PR manager, and addressed the firm via live stream. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and resonant, "Sterling Equity Partners stands at a crossroads. Recent decisions have shaken our foundation, but I'm here to tell you we're stronger than ever. Today, I'm proud to announce the restoration of $200 million, 0 cents in funding, $20 million, 0 cents above our prior commitments. Coastal Bay, Global Zenith, and Horizon Corp are back, and they're betting on us." The room erupted in applause, but Margaret raised a hand, her expression sober. "This isn't a victory lap, it's a call to action. We're adopting a balanced approach. Innovation with stability, ambition with trust. Ethan Caldwell will transition to a non-executive role, leading innovation projects under my oversight. Together we'll rebuild what's been broken and forge a future worthy of Sterling's name." The applause was louder this time, but Margaret's words hit a deeper truth. Ethan's reassignment was a cage, not a promotion. She'd insisted on it, knowing he'd chafe under her thumb, his every move scrutinized. The board had agreed, eager to placate investors without fully cutting Ethan loose, but Margaret wasn't fooled. Ethan's allies, Obsidian Capital, Claire, and whoever else lurked in the shadows, were still out there, and she needed to flush them out. As the crowd dispersed, Daniel Chen approached, his face pale. "Margaret, I need to talk to you, alone." She nodded, leading him to a conference room. Daniel locked the door, his voice barely above a whisper. "Obsidian's not just a firm, it's a front." "The Zurich deal?" "It's a leveraged buyout plan. Ethan was setting up Sterling to be carved up and sold. I found emails between him and a guy named Victor Kane, Obsidian's CEO. They mention a silent partner on the board." Margaret's blood ran cold. A board member betraying Sterling from within? "Who is it, Daniel?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, his hands trembling. "But Kane's meeting someone in New York tomorrow. I hacked Ethan's calendar. There's a blocked-off slot at the Four Seasons, 7 p.m. It's got to be connected." Margaret's mind raced. A silent partner, A buyout. Ethan hadn't just been reckless. He'd been orchestrating a coup. She handed Daniel a burner phone. "Keep digging, but stay off the grid. If anyone asks, you're working on my investor reports. I'll handle the Four Seasons." That evening, Margaret sat across from Victoria Strathmore at a discreet corner table in Le Bernardin. The restaurant's elegance masked the urgency of their conversation. Victoria sipped her martini, her emerald eyes glinting with intrigue. "You've got the funding, the role, and Ethan on a leash," she said. "But you're not celebrating. What's got you spooked, darling?" Margaret leaned forward, her voice low. "Ethan's deeper in than we thought. He's tied to Obsidian Capital, and they're planning a buyout. There's a board member involved, someone feeding them intel. I need your people to dig into Victor Kane, Obsidian's CEO." Quietly. Victoria's smile was predatory. "Consider it done. But be careful, Margaret. Ethan's desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. If he's got a board member in his pocket, you're not just fighting him, you're fighting Sterling itself." Margaret nodded, her jaw tightening. "Then I'll fight dirty." The chapter unfolds with relentless momentum, weaving Margaret's strategic maneuvers with escalating threats. She navigates a clandestine meeting at the Four Seasons, spotting Claire with an unknown man who vanishes into the crowd. James uncovers a link between Victor Kane and a disgraced financier from Ethan's past, hinting at a decade-old grudge. Sarah's digging reveals Claire's encrypted emails to a board member. Catherine Ramsey, raising suspicions of her loyalty. The plots twist and turn. Daniel's hacking puts him in Obsidian's crosshairs, and a mysterious figure leaves Margaret a note: "Trust no one." The Zurich deal lives. The narrative pulses with suspense, betrayal, and moral ambiguity, each revelation pushing Margaret closer to a truth that could destroy Sterling or redefine it. Readers are left breathless, craving the next move in this high-stakes game. The Tuscan sun dipped low over the rolling hills, casting a golden glow across the vineyard where Margaret Ellison stood, a glass of Chianti in hand. Her silver hair, now loose and streaked with more white than a year ago, caught the breeze, and her hazel eyes sparkled with a contentment that had eluded her during the corporate wars of Manhattan. Beside her, James, his face softened by retirement, slipped an arm around her waist, his laughter mingling with the distant hum of cicadas. Their villa, a stone-clad retreat nestled in Val d'Orsay, was a far cry from Sterling Equity Partners' glass towers, but it was home, a new chapter after a lifetime of battles. A year had passed since Margaret's tenure as Chief Client Relations Officer, a role she'd wielded like a maestro conducting an orchestra. Under her stewardship, Sterling hadn't just survived, it had thrived. The $200 million 0-cents funding restoration she'd secured had been a springboard, not a finish line. By leveraging her unmatched rapport with investors, Margaret had orchestrated a record-breaking client retention rate, with Coastal Bay Global Zenith and Horizon Corp not only recommitting, but increasing their stakes. New investors, drawn by her reputation, had poured in, fueling a 15% year-over-year growth that analysts called the Ellison effect. Sterling's balanced approach, blending innovation with stability, had silenced skeptics and its stock price soared. Ethan Caldwell, relegated to a toothless innovation role, had faded into irrelevance. The Zurich deal, exposed as a predatory buyout scheme, collapsed under Margaret's relentless pursuit of truth. Victor Kane and Obsidian Capital faced federal scrutiny, and Catherine Ramsey, unmasked as the board's traitor, resigned in disgrace. Ethan, stripped of allies, left Sterling quietly, his ambitions reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Margaret hadn't just won, she'd rewritten the game. Her final act as CRO was to handpick her successor, Sarah Gwynn. The fierce whip-mart assistant who'd been her shadow for a decade stepped into the role with a fire Margaret recognized as her own. At Sarah's swearing-in, held in Sterling's newly renovated atrium, Margaret had passed her the metaphorical baton. her voice steady but warm. "Sterling's not just a firm, it's a promise," she'd said. Sarah, tears in her eyes, had nodded, and the applause that followed echoed through the firm's history. Now, in Italy, Margaret was free. She and James spent their days exploring medieval villages, savoring long lunches, and planning a sailing trip along the Amalfi coast. The corporate chessboard was a distant memory, replaced by a life of quiet victories. James's terrible Italian accent, the stray dog they'd adopted, the vineyard's first harvest. Yet Sterling's pulse still reached her. Sarah's monthly emails brimmed with updates, new deals, rising profits, and a culture of trust Margaret had fought to preserve. Her legacy was secure not in titles or trophies, but in the firm she'd built and the lives she'd shaped. As the sun sank below the horizon, Margaret raised her glass to James, her smile soft but fierce. "To us," she said, "and to leaving the world better than we found it." James clinked his glass against hers, his eyes crinkling. "To you, Maggie, you did that and more." Dear reader, thank you for walking this journey with Margaret Ellison, a woman who faced betrayal, wielded power, and carved her own path through a world that tried to break her. Her story of resilience, cunning, and redemption is one we hope lingered in your mind, sparking questions, emotions, and perhaps a spark of your own ambition. As we close this tale, we invite you to carry Margaret's fire with you, to challenge the Athens of your world, to build something enduring, and to never let anyone dim your light. What did you think of Margaret's triumph? Who stole your heart, broke it, or left you guessing? Share your thoughts, your theories, or even your own stories. We're all ears. Until our next adventure, keep turning the page of your own life with courage and grace. With gratitude.